Hello guys, welcome back to another book reading session. I'm going to go back to the Britain, the Key to World History by Comyns Beaumont. It's been an interesting book. It's hard reading, I've got to say it's hard reading. And the guy that recommended me this book, the other YouTuber, Jonathan McTemaze, I think his name is, he's kind of gave up. So it isn't, you need to use endurance. Anyway, I'm going to premise this with saying that I don't agree with everything the author is saying in the book. I do relate to a lot of stuff that he says, because through my years of research, I've seen many clues that link Britain to things like the Hebrews or the Bible. The Bible might just have its roots in Old Britain. But the point is, the author, he reckons that there was an Atlantis in northern Britain, and it was made up of the Shetland Islands, the Faroe Islands. These islands were all connected because the sea was lower. And he reckons a meteorite came, created a catastrophe, and then people from north of Britain had to move south because of climate, whatever it is. And as they moved south, they built new temples. And he reckons Shetland was the original place of these people, the Atlanteans, in his theory. And they ended up at Stonehenge, Avebury area. And I'm not too sure if that was meant to be, he states that it's meant to be Abraham from the Bible. And I think there's some truth to it, because like I said in my recent videos, guys, I've been watching the BBC documentary Britain's Ancient Capital, Orkney. And they're finding new archaeological discoveries that link Orkney Islands with Stonehenge. And they reckon that the Orkney Island circles, stone circles, are much older, well, a few hundred years older than the Stonehenge ones. And they reckon it was some kind of stone circle cult. That's what they're calling it in the BBC documentary, a stone circle cult. But what led me to this book was my interest in the Celtic culture and ancient civilizations and things like that. I've not got a bias towards it supporting the Bible or being against the Bible. But when I see certain things in the Bible, to me it reminds me of Northern European. It doesn't feel like it's set in the Middle East. Even the pyramids don't get a mention in the Bible. But you'll find in the Bible they'll talk about wild boar and forests and things like that, and you're like, where was there forests in Palestine? They might say that there was like desertification or whatever it's called when the place dries up, or climate change, and there used to be forests. But there's certain things in the Bible that do make you think. And the fact that I think the Romans, the Celts, never called themselves Celts. They never called themselves Celts. That was a word the Romans used on the Celts. And the Romans called themselves Heberi or Iberi. And you can trace that to Iberia or Hibernia. And this is where the Celts come from. And I think the Roman Empire pushed the Celts right to the edges of Britain, Western Europe. On the islands of the Hebrides, like these far-flung islands, this Celtic culture is pushed right to the edge. And I think to fall in line with Christian ideology, I think a lot of the Celtic religion is like the Celtic gods have been turned into saints, Christian saints. Like there's certain saints that you see, and you can link them with a Celtic god easily. So it looks like the Celtic culture has just turned their gods into saints. And I wonder if this started in Britain and spread to the Middle East. Because there's this theory that the Celtic culture started in Austria, Hungary, maybe closer to the Middle East, and spread throughout Western Europe and into Britain. But I think it's the other way around, guys. I think the Celtic culture began in Britain and spread its way through, and maybe went back again, back and forth. Different forms of Celtic paganism formed in different regions. But I don't believe it started in Central Europe and moved to Britain. I think the Celtic culture probably started in Western Europe and moved the other way. And who's saying that the Bible never took the same journey? Who's saying that the Bible never took the same journey? For all we know, these artifacts could be fake that they found. Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that they found in the Middle East. They didn't really find these things till after the war, a lot of them. It's hard to really trace back. So anyway, guys, I'm just trying to put some pieces together. And this book is interesting. It gives you some ideas and some things that you should really look into and research. Places. This guy here, the author, I think he's gone away off a wee bit. He's starting to use Greek culture and things like that, and I do see some Greek stuff and old, other old cultures like Roman culture in Scotland, but obviously it was brought here. It wasn't created here. There is things like Europa and the Isle of Lewis. It does seem like the Greek goddess Europa. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Don't know. But my point is, I think the Celtic gods are a lot like the Greek gods anyway. Like we had sea gods, we had sky gods, we had thunder gods. So did the Scandinavians, so did the Greeks. I think a lot of these gods got turned into saints to fall into the whole Christian belief. And who knows, the Bible could be just a story of old Celtic gods, pagan gods, turned into people. Old celestial movements turned into people. So that's where I'm going with this. I don't hold any bias. I'm not a religious fanatic, and I'm not an atheist. I'm more interested in the civilization part of it, the movement of peoples. Was there an Atlantis? Was there a more civilized people in the north, in Hyperborea, Hibernia? And it's interesting. It is really interesting. The book is hard reading though, and the guy that recommended me, Jonathan. He's kind of gave up on it, but that's a shame, because even if you find it hard reading, you should just continue. Even if it gets hard, you should just continue reading to the end, because it's not fair if there is people listening and you've just ended it there. That's not really fair. So I'm going to continue reading this right to the end. I've took Jonathan's link out my description, because if he's not going to continue reading this, what's the point of me linking you to his channel? And he's more about Yahweh, and maybe he's looking at a more biased view, a more religious outlook. But I'm not here to disprove the Bible or prove the Bible. I'm just looking for clues. And this guy, Comyns Beaumont, he's done a whole life's worth of research, and there is a lot of truths to it and a lot of coincidences that you should look at. But I think there's a lot of speculation as well. So just keep your mind open. Anyway, guys, hope you are having a good afternoon, night, morning, wherever you are. I'll continue reading this book. Right, where were we? We were on page 103. I think it was just, I finished the sentence, thus we may find a solution to the meaning attached to the pillars of Hercules. Right. We may identify with some certainty, I think, that the reddish islands of Erythea and the red and rocky peninsula of Warbury Camp, which towers above the town of Weston-super-Mare, a former, outlying and very powerful fortress which guarded the sea approach to the Avon, and also defended the silver mines of Mendip. And I had a look at this, people. There is an old Iron Age, this Warburley Camp. Yep, it's there. The guy's right. Pre-Roman Iron Age camp. And like I said, guys, you can end up going into hours of research just looking at this kind of stuff. That's what happens to me. I end up reading a wee bit, finding a place, thinking I've never heard of that place, looking at it and spending ages just researching the place. But the fort is located on the summit of Warburley Hill, 109 metres, 358 feet above sea level, is in the present day North Somerset, above the seaside resort of Weston-super-Mare and close to the village of Worrell. Its occupants would have had a view of the countryside as well as any potential invaders. They would have been able to see out over to Sugarloaf Mountain, the Black Mountains, the Mendip Hills, Dunkery Beacon, Sand Point and Wales. This view is no longer as unobstructed as it once was because there are so many trees spread over the hill. So like I said, guys, you can take pieces out the book and go on your own path of research. A skull found during Diamond's second exploration, which is gouged with many cuts from an edged weapon. Right, we'll get back to the book anyway. The strom of this notable landmark is red marl, of which a vein stretches southwards in a narrow band from opposite Sere Order, of which Warburley is the outer crop. Its summit there is crowned with the remains of a stupendous stone fortification, and it possesses, in addition, some 93 unexplained pits, thought by some antiquarians to have been former storage places for the silver lead ore mined on the adjoining Mendips. But what did the oxen signify which Hercules traditionally seized from Gerion's hold? Sir William Ridgway, whose authority in regard to Greek mythology and antiquities few would question, has contended that in prehistoric times oxen were actually ingots or pigs of silver stamped with an ox head, it being the original token of value. Here, we may say, lies the possible explanation. Gerion's oxen were stamped ingots or pigs of the silver lead ore from the Argentarius mine. Avenius has therefore conducted us from one outstanding topographical feature to another until we attain the Avon River a little beyond the ancient, one could say fabulous, island of Gerion, except that an understanding of its site and purpose makes them mythical at once logical and proper. The region we have been examining of Somerset and, as will be duly seen, the most sacred pagan territory in all Britain, not excluding Iona and Staffa, leads us directly to the port of Gades or Tartessus itself. As Avius states, only a day's journey sail from the mouth of Tartessus or Parrot River. This coastal region was once part of the territories of the tribe of Gad, thus explaining many Cad, i.e. Gad, place names in it to this day. The situation of Gads included the famous silver mines of antiquity, and it was noted for its fisheries. Strabo mentions that tunny fish were caught in large numbers off the coast, as they are yet, and that shellfish were also abundant. The salted eels of Tartessus, as Aristophanes observes, were a delicacy at Athenian tables. It so happens that the inland water of Somerset were and are yet particularly renowned for the great quantity of eels they produce. In Domesday Book, 2 eel fisheries belonging to Malcolney Abbey alone produce 6,000 eels annually. Young eels, known as elvers, come up the Parrot in immense numbers every spring from across the ocean, and are, or were, made into appetising fish cakes. But beyond all, Tarshish was famed for its silver mines, and there the Romans employed some 40,000 slaves, from which 20,000 drachmas of silver were refined yearly. Jeremiah mentions that silver spread into plates is brought from Tarshish, which suggests that as far back as his day, the silver lead of Mendip was known and being worked. The truth is, we know so little about our country until after the Roman occupation. All this coast region of Somerset, therefore, is described by Avenius as Tartessian. Here lay the great metal centre of remote antiquity. The ores from Cornwall, Devon also, including tin, copper, lead, zinc, silver, lead, and even gold from washing in certain areas, brought by track or boat to their destination to be smelted and worked. Tin, so essential in the Bronze Age for the manufacture of weapons of war, was vital as the essential alloy, and here it was in plenty and nowhere else discoverable until far later. It is often stated that tin was mined at or near Gades or Tarshish in southern Spain, altogether misleading, accepted without examination, for the stratum contains no tin in that region, except in the very north, where there are few indications of prehistoric workings. Britain and the Cassiterides were the one source. When Dionysius Perigetes says that in the Hesperides, whence comes tin, dwell the sons of the noble Ibres, he intended Britain. In the book of Enoch, which describes the feverish manufacture of arms in these regions, the Garden of Eden in the west, Enoch is conducted by an angel to the Garden of Righteousness just before the flood, and perceives the dumps of raw materials. The passage continues. A mountain of iron, a mountain of copper, of gold, of soft metal, of lead. What are these which I have seen in secret? He asked the angel of peace. He replied, all these things which thou hast seen shall serve the dominion of his anointed, that he may be potent and mighty on earth. In other words, Enoch was shown dumps of various ores which had evidently been collected for the enrichment or strength of his anointed. All this is depicted as happening in the Garden of Eden. Havilah, which as will be duly seen was situated in these very same parts. Gades, Tarshish or Tartessus, the great industrial city and port, exported ores and manufactured goods to the civilized world. Isaiah terms her daughter the daughter of Tyre, as certainly may be said to have been the case, closely associated with the Isles of Chittim or the Isles of the West, with Elisha, where according to Ezekiel, purple and scarlet silk was produced for sale of ships. The pedigree chapter of Genesis states that Javan was the father of Elisha, also of Tarshish, the Isles of Chittim, and Dodanim or Dedanim, all being termed sons of the Gentiles. Javan in turn is given as the son of Gomer, and Josephus adds to this by saying that the latter was a progenitor of the Gomerai or the Galashai, who were the Comyrians, or, as I have striven to show in my former work, the Chaldo-Phoenicians. These genealogical names are mainly geographical. Javan, or Avon, appears thus to represent none other than the river Avon, and hence Javan is used occasionally to signify Tarshish, situated in that same river. The Isle of Chittim, or Kittim, were the Isles of the Cassi, or Catai, known as the Cassiterides, or Tin Islands, most of which has been destroyed or submerged by various cataclysms or earthquakes which have periodically afflicted the coasts of Cornwall and North Devon and Somerset. Whether Elisha were an island or not is uncertain, but mention of the manufacture of purple and scarlet silks for sales suggests its proximity to Tarshish. It's funny how purple and scarlet silks, those colours, purple and scarlet, and when you hear, is it the whore of Babylon? I'm sure she was supposed to be wearing purple and scarlet. The Dedanim, not Dodanim, nor the marginal Rhodanim, were placed in the area of Taunton on the verge of the Parrot River. Thus we find Ezekiel saying, Dan and Javan, going to and fro occupied in Tyre's markets, meaning that the sons of Dan, Dedan, and the men of Tarshish were busily engaged in trading with Tyre. Synonyms like Javan to imply Tarshish were popular with the prophets, just as they also expressed the maritime strength of Tarshish in the words ships of Chittim. Tarshish possessed a great shipbuilding trade besides being a port, for it not only lay in the most convenient site on the great sea or ocean, but employed a large army of skilled labour engaged in maritime pursuits as mariners and shipwrights. The port had all the materials handy, such as timber, caulking with tar, sails and other equipment for extended voyages. Sails were an essential factor in her industrial pursuits. They were made, like tents, from long silky hair of a special breed of goats, kept for that purpose, and Avienus describes the country near Tartessus, saying that on a rocky shore numerous long-haired goats wandered in the undergrowth or scrub, their hair furnishing a strong and unbreakable silk for making tents and sails, and were specially bred for that purpose. Plato refers to the same trade indirectly when he says that Gadirius, the twin brother of Atlas, who built Gades, signifies rich in goats. So maybe this is where we get this goats symbolism from. Everyone thinks it's Satanism or something, and the goat could represent this. Right, Josephus, in stating that Tarshish was a son of Javan or Avan, adds the illuminating words, for so was Kilchia of old called. This goat's silk or mohair was named Kilsium, the name derived from Kilix, the brother of Cadmus, who corresponds to Lot as Cadmus does to Abram. Kilicium, when given a sibilant pronunciation, is analogous to our word silk in Old English, silk, and silk or silk was the name given to the mohair. In this we face a strange problem when we consider that Javan was called Kilikia, that the specially cultivated mohair was named Kilicium, and that this relationship is all linked up with Tarshish or Tartatus in the west, like the Isles of Chittim, and yet we apparently find another Chalchia in Asia Minor, also with a city named Tarsus or Tarshish, where St. Paul was supposed to have been born and to have been a tent maker. I can only presume that the Asiatic Tarsus and Chilica were colonized by the Phoenicians and named afterwards. But as for St. Paul, there are most circumstantial accounts of his travels and missions and residence in Britain. Accounts which it would be blindness to ignore, for they are authenticated in many ways apart from his friend and covert Claudia, wife of Pudens, who was a British woman of noble birth, whom Marcion praises for her beautiful blue eyes and red hair. Apart from the Sicilian origin of St. Paul, there is also St. George, England's patron saint, also reputed to have been a Sicilian. It is generally known, says a writer to the subject, that Sicilia is the native country of the renowned St. George, who was born at Epiphania, a small town near the Amavian gates, in a fuller's shop. Epiphania, incidentally, was a later name said to have been given to Hamath. Other accounts say he was born, martyred and buried at Lydda in Saron, that he was a tribune under Diocletian, that he was an archbishop of Alexandria, murdered by a furious rabble in AD 361, and that Constantine the Great dedicated the Church of St. George to him at Alexandria as a warrior saint. Finally, the Welsh had a tradition that he fought and slew the dragon near Abergele, and show the marks of the hoofs of his steed to this day as witness. For my part, I should opine that he was a variation of St. Michael, as he in turn became a Christian apotheosis of Apollo or Horus. These lands of the west, including the Chalchia or Silk area, that was Javan, are referred to in a striking passage in the book of Judith. King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Assyria, who answers to Sennacherib, sent his messengers westwards to demand homage from all who dwelt in Chalchia, Carmel, Gilead, Galilee, and Cadiz, the river of Egypt, Taphnes and Ramesses, until you come beyond Tanis and Memphis. Every one of these place names can be identified in the west of England or in South Wales, and they all fit in the one region to which undoubtedly they belong. On the other hand, when transferred to the supposed sites relating to the scriptures, they are dispersed and rendered ridiculous. The Syrian king, on accepted topography, sent to Anatolian Turkey as Kilikia, Palestine as Carmel, Transjordania as Gilead, North Palestine as Galilee, also Cades or Kadesh, locality undetermined. Nile Delta, river of Egypt, which delta also answers for Rames and Taphnes, and finally beyond Cairo, Memphis. The Assyrians in question were not roving over a region of some 500 miles in length and requiring a large array of armies to overcome it. While it is to be noted that only specified places are named as in the West, the entire fabric of ancient geography requires complete revision if we are to understand past history. To return to British Cilicia, where the traditions of Abraham and Lot agree so completely in topography with Cadmus and Cilix, it is interesting to record that ancient coins of Tarshish, which closely resemble pre-Roman coins of Britain, display a figure like our Britannia, or a goat with an inscription Sel or Sil, the proper pronunciation, no doubt, of a name derived from that ancient word Silic. Are our scholists justified in sounding so many Latin words beginning with C as a hard K? Tarshish had a close and intimate relation with King Solomon, and that the monarch's maritime traffic, with his storehouses at Hamath and his ships sailed by men of Tarshish who went on their 3-year voyages to Ophir or Peru, the land of gold. His activities in the swamp area of Somerset may possibly be recovered, but he certainly acquired the port of Ezion Geber in Edom, where he built ships taken to Tarshish to form part of the convoy to Ophir. How in the modern interpretation of Bible geography were ships built in Edom able to go by sea to Tarshish? Edom, or Duma, later Idume, was really the present Cornwall and part of Devon, and was given the name of Dumnoia in Roman days in Britain. The resemblance of Cornwall to a man's leg is the otherwise inexplicable sentence of the psalmist, "Over Edom I will cast my shoe," perhaps a somewhat grim topographical jest. Edom is today dumped in the Arabian desert, as desert it has been from early geological ages, and yet Edom is praised for her culture, fertility, industry and her wealth in biblical times. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Alright guys, I'm back. Had to help Mrs. with something. Got a new cot for the baby. Bloody heavy box. Right. That's why I make breath, guys. Where was I? In 1939... Can you hear me? Aye. Right. In 1939, an industrious American archaeologist, Professor Nelson Gluck of the US School of Oriental Research, discovered Ezion Geber at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba in southern Arabia. His authority for such a claim was that he found some walls, remnants of nondescript pottery and signs of smelting, the rest being a prodigious amount of wishful thinking. Consider what the site would have meant. There was no Suez Canal in those days. Thus, these ships to reach Tarshish, whence they set out with Hirams on those long voyages, would have been compelled to sail around the entire African continent and up the Atlantic to the river Avon. Or, if we presume for argument's sake that the Tarshish was the Cilicia, now supposedly Anatolia, after rounding Africa, they would have had to sail the entire length of the Mediterranean Sea to boot. Geography ridicules the theory. We read that in the region of Josaphat, ships built in Ezion Geber intended to sail for Ophir via Tarshish were broken and unable to go thither. The inference was that they had not far to sail to Tarshish but were wrecked on their way. I propose that the real site of Ezion Geber was the ancient town of Marazion in Cornwall, adjoining St Michael's Mount, a mining centre like the land of Edom. Marazion from ancient times has been known locally as Jews' Town, as also its ancient smelting sites have been designated Jews' houses from time immemorial. In the reign of Henry VIII, it was yet a port and smelting town of importance, returned to members of Parliament, and was described by Leyland as a great long town. Gold was once mined at West Webburn and below Lethador, and tin from Redruth and Totnes were there once flourished tin and copper mines. Sir Edward Creasy, in his History of England, perhaps spoke more truly than he knew when he said, "The British mines mainly supplied the glorious adornments of Solomon's temple." The name of Marazion may be corruption of Mer, and Azion or Ezion, both words being used of old, while Geber appears to be a variation of Eber or Heber, hence the name signifying the Hebrew Ezion or Ezion, on sea. Inward Lock and Co's Guide to Penzance. The writer says, there is a traditional story that Joseph of Arimathea himself was connected with Marazion. When he and other Jews traded with the ancient tin miners of Cornwall, St. Joseph of Arimathea was certainly closely connected with Avalon or Glastonbury. Returning now to our main quest, Tarshish or Gades or Gadir, which Avienus treats with sant respect as in ruins, humble and poor, and with evidence of the Avon estuary, where the grim fortress of Cheddar Order, otherwise Gadara, commanded the Avon 6 miles from its mouth. We must necessarily turn our eyes to Bristol, of which the prehistoric fortress is an outlier. Bristol stands on the tongue of a land forming a peninsula, bounded on two sides by the Avon and Frome, which unite in the city, and by the Bristol Channel on the other. Built partly on low ground, partly on eminences, its importance in Roman times is demonstrated by a chain of 25 forts or camps extending for 40 miles in the northeast, beginning from the Cheddar Order and on all in direct signalling call from one to another in case of need. From as early a date as any records exist, Bristol conducted a considerable shipping trade, especially with the Irish and Scandinavian lands. Exported salt fish, including tunny and eels, as well as a rough cloth to the Baltic and Ireland. The trade with Wales was also large, and there existed a trajectus or ferry service between Portishead, on the southern mouth of the Avon, and Portscouet. Phelps, the historian antiquarian of Somerset, speaks of Bristol as a great port of the Brigantes, whence the city acquired the name of Brigastow or Bridgestow. It commanded the passages across the Severn, and the Romans, who desired to control this lucrative trade, blockaded the Severn with incursions of the Silures. This so angered the Bristol rulers that they foolishly declared war on Rome, because the Romans interfered with their traffic in ores and probably in coal transport. It seems likely that the sequel to this war was the ruined city of Gadir, spoken of by Avienus. A few remarks should be made here about the Brigantes. At the time of the Claudian invasion of AD 43, according to Tacitus, the Brigantes were the most populous and important of the British tribes, with their capital in York. From Solway Firth and the Tyne, this people dominated the country south between the Mersey and Humber, excluding Wales and East Anglia, or the south as a whole. They seem to have acted from the first as allies of the Romans, early made peace and traded with them. They portrayed Caractacus, the leader of the Silures, the British Caradoc, and Damon Spot in their history. The Triads referred to them as the Guidelian Ficti, or Goylos, who came over the sea of Lichlan and united with the Saxons to deprive the Cymry of the monarchical crown. They dwelt first in Alban, or Albany, and there is little doubt that they were actually descended from the Trojans or Phrygians who occupied Scotland from Fifeshire to the Solway Firth, as the ancient Dalriac legends describe. Procopius terms the Frisians, and they apparently first invaded Britain about 1103 BC from Frisia and the Low Countries. The scepticism respecting the well-authenticated Trojan dynasty in Britain, although accepted unquestionably in Elizabeth's time, is mainly because the origins as Phrygians is wrongly described to Asia Minor. They may be traced properly to Hanover and the Low Countries. Baxter, a learned antiquarian, classifies them as Phrygians, later Frisians, who became masters of all of Europe at an early date, and says they spoke the Frisian tongue. In their own annals, they have claimed to be originally descended from the tribe of Gad, and if Herodotus be correct in stating that the Briges or Brigai of Thrace claim to have been the ancestors of the Phrygians or Trojans, this is justified, for their origin was that of the Chaldeans or Caledonians, the original home of the tribe of Gad or the Cushites, as I have previously indicated. This claim is commemorated in a bardic poem of Caedmon, the Brigantine poet, entitled I Sing of the Origin of the Gadalians, in which he claimed that the Brigantes descended from Gad, founded Brigantia in Spain, and that his posterity sailed from Ireland. Chas, squire and miss of the British Islands, say that Spain, in ancient traditions, was often a synonym for the Celtic underworld, but on the authority of Ortelius, the Brigantes were certainly also settled in Waterford and Kilkenny. Tradition speaks of their city named Brigantium or Brigantia, where Brioganus built a pharos or lighthouse from whence he espied Ireland and sent a colony there. Orosius, the historian, says that Brigantium was built by the Tyrian Hercules, like Gades or Gadir, and Posidonius locates it near the port of the Artabrians, which would point towards Bristol. Bardic legends speak of emigration from Brigantium to Ireland under two chiefs named Erimon or Herimon and Eber, and infer that it lay in Britain. It is likely, however, that Brigantium lay in Galloway, now Wiggintonshire. It would seem that they entered Britain some 200 years after the Great Catastrophe, and subsequently established or re-established Bristol, the original city of Gad or Gades in the west, as their port. Bristol is mentioned in the Roman Notitia as Brig in conjunction with Avernum, the Severn. Although this historic port must have occupied more or less the site of Bristol, there is no reason to believe that Gades occupied a considerable area on the south side of the Avon where lies Portishead, head of the port. An ancient British trackway led from where is now Gloucester or the Care Order and crossing the Avon to the Chasm, continued through a narrow defile and the steep escarpment on either side, at the summit being the two strong camps of Stokely and Burnwalls facing one another. They both possess a double fosse or ditch with a triple agger or mound formed originally of large stones cemented with a pure lime. Stokely is the most elaborated fortified of the two. Continued from Stokely 331 feet, there is a range of red marl hills which crosses a peninsula from Long Ashton to Clavedon, with Walberley beyond, giving a ridgeway never below 450 feet, sometimes rising to above 500 feet, and thus forms the base of a triangular promontory of which Portishead is the apex, washed by the Avon mouth or the Bristol Channel on either side. Stokely and Bourton Water are at the northern extremity of the base, and Cadbury Camp, at its southern. Having Fairland with an ancient camp at its centre, inside this triangular piece of land was a fort at Portbury. At the mouth of the Avon and the Portishead, head of the port, was protected by a fort of 16 acres in size on Maze Knoll, a wooded height today, such as the region of which may have been, and very likely was the original city of Gades or Tartessus. So what's this place called? Maze Knoll. Let's see what we get when we type in Maze Knoll here. So here's Maze Knoll. So everywhere he's mentioned there are ancient structures. Maze Knoll, sometimes Maze Tump or Maze Knoll Tump, is an Iron Age fort in Somerset, England, located on the eastern end of Dundry Down Ridge, south of the city of Bristol and north of the village Norton Malreward, near the eastern city of Dundry Hill. It is a scheduled ancient monument. So it's a hill fort which is approximately 390 by 84 feet. Consists of a fairly large flat open area, roughly triangular in shape, which the author mentions that has been fortified by ramparts and shaping of the steep-sided hilltop around the northern, eastern and southern sides of the hill. It is believed to have been built around 250 BC by the Dobuni, who were one of the Celtic tribes living in the British Isles prior to the Roman invasion in Britain. So this is what I'm saying, guys. All these places the author mentions are old Iron Age sites. Along the base of this aforesaid triangle are 4 villages strangely named: Easton and Gordano, East Town; Clapton and Gordano, middle of town, OE; Weston and Gordano, West Town; and near the last named at the extremity, Walton and Gordano, Wall Town, the town by the wall. These names signify a former city with its east, middle and west and walled area, a city of considerable size. But what is the significance of Ingordano? The Wadi suggest a derivation from Gordon or Gordine, signifying a wedge-shaped piece of land. I cannot believe that 4 quarters of an ancient town stressed that they were built merely in a wedge shape, such as Easton and the Wedge. Rather, the names appear to preserve a city of great and ancient repute, and I should conjecture that the words in Gordano signify simply in the garden, not any ordinary garden, but the Garden of Eden, or Garden of the Lord, the sacred spot immortalized by the scriptures and classic writers, and that here lay the original city of Sodom, the southern city, from whence those represented by Lot fled to seek refuge from the destruction of these parts, and sought refuge in caves of Mendip nearby. Such a possibility would fit in with many other matters in this marvellous region of remote antiquity. In view of importance and amplitude of Gades or Tarshish or Tartessus, we must recollect that at its door and under its control lay the silver mines of Mendip. One Cadbury fort has been noted, and there is a second on the edge of the Mendip country, a name which implies the influence of Cad or Gad, Gades being also known as Cades or Kadesh. Beyond Cadbury Camp, too, stands Dalbury Camp, with a huge vallum of stone and an immense fosse, considered by antiquarians to have been used as a watchtower in the vicinity of the mines. Another landmark relating to the famous silver mines, so called, takes us again to Walbury, which I have proposed was the original of the height of Brigantes for Walbury, continuing as the strata of red marl lies near the Ingordano area of a formerly largely uninhabited site. Of this height, Phelps observed, "It is singularly formed and of great antiquity, and from its commanding situation must have been a most important post, connected no doubt with the commercial intercourse of the Phoenicians and subsequent navigators of the seas. It commands the course of the Severn completely and consists of huge vallum defended in the north by the rocky escarpment of the hill. There are various traces of earthworks." It was thus evidently a considerable stronghold, both by sea and land, and unexplained 93 pits which have been considered to have been repositories for the ingots of pig of lead from the Mendip mines, whereas Gerion's oxen, as was explained by Professor Ridgway, that oxen was a term used to describe such ingots stamped with an ox head as a sign of value, give a common sense explanations of the raid by Hercules, perhaps one carried out by the sons of Dan, who dwelt not far away and were given to such adventures. To sum up the preceding evidence of the past, I may claim that the strongest case has been made out, so far as evidence of prehistoric times is available, to prove that the great city of Gad, or Tarshish, or Tartessus, stood on the site of Bristol and on the opposite bank of the Avon River, the Javan of the Scriptures on the promontory where is Portishead and head of the port. What port? Hamath. Portbury cannot explain the name sufficiently. These place names afford striking evidence of the past, and Somerset has no fewer than 17 forts or barrows named Cad, or an indication of the ubiquity of the famous tribe. Then take the case of Gadara, where in conjunction with the entire surroundings it is surely impossible to dismiss features so characteristic as the hot springs and the citadel on the height by a river commanding a steep precipice, together with the legend of the guardian swine in the story of King Bladud, and the swine whose example cured him of his leprosy, or take the detailed description of outstanding features given by Avienus along the shores from Land's End to the city of Gadir, his account of the swamplands which covered so much of Somerset until about 100 years ago when they were drained, or the silver mines so called and used as such by our own modern kings to mint coins, or that outstanding mines of Argentarius corroborated by a stamped ingot bearing the first 3 letters of the word, or that Javan was called Cilicia, according to Josephus, the region where the long-haired goats were cultivated for the manufacture of sails and tents at Tartessus or Tarshish, or the remarkable antiquities of Walbury which appear to be associated with the mythological Gerion. These are outstanding indications which point to the climax, namely the site of the great port which apparently the Brigantes named Brigstow, whence our modern Bristol. Can all this accumulated evidence be cast aside as of little account? Whether or no I am justified in attributing the significance of those strangely named villages on the border of the ancient city of Tarshish in Gordano as a stressing of the claim that they were situated in the garden of the Lord, or the garden of the Hesperides, or the scriptural term the garden of Eden, may be conjectural, for I have yet to produce the evidence which proves this to have been the case. The Garden of Eden was placed by the ancient scribes who composed the Old Testament as in the regions of Havilah, and here it was in that same region that we are told Sodom or Kadesh was destroyed by fire from heaven. If any doubt the application of such descriptions to these ancient parts, perhaps almost the oldest inhabited land, as witness the geological evidence of the Mendip caves, permit me to cite a description of the heritage of Israel according to Ezekiel on the south and the west. And the south side, southward, from Tamar to the waters of Meribah or Strife and Kadesh, the river or valley to the great sea. The west side shall be the great sea from the border or coast, till a man come over against Hamath. This is the west side. Do we not find the river Tamar bordering on North Devon and Cornwall? Cannot we trace the waters of Meribah in the great marsh of Erebia, as described by Avienus, where the waters of strife relate to the special events in those parts? Have we not the great sea in the Atlantic Ocean, beating against those same shores in the west? And have we not Hamath defined as the mouth of the Avon, where stood the famed city of Kadesh or Gades? One may stretch the long arm of coincidence, but stretch it too far and it collapses. These famous and secret spots in the history, not only of Britain, but of the world of long ago, fit into their allotted place, as I have said before, like a huge mosaic pavement, not yet completely filled in, it is true, but sufficiently to give an outline of the other parts belonging to it. For as yet I have not completed my task, which is to describe the last days of the ancient world before the great catastrophe, as it unfolds and revolves largely around these very parts. There is yet the subject of Avalon or Glastonbury and its surroundings to be considered, perhaps the most revealing centre of all in the hitherto concealed history of the past, as it reaches its appointed end for a period only to emerge once more like a phoenix when it renewed its life. Thus I now turn to the hidden story of Glastonbury. The romance of Glastonbury. As a better realization is perceived that Celtic folklore preserves the vestiges of a former great civilization in Britain, Glastonbury was aroused as a new and growing interest among students of antiquity, beyond the fact that it was traditionally regarded with deep veneration in the prehistoric period of King Arthur and his knights. It is closely associated in a mysterious manner with the Celtic underworld, faith recognised by students of the subject, like Mr. Lewis Spence and Mr. Foster Forbes, as something difficult to define but remarkably persistent. In the ages when Christianity first budded, Avalon, its Celtic name, played a very vital part therein. It was furthermore regarded as the Celtic paradise and, in the words of a modern writer, ages before the foundation of its monasteries, Glastonbury was famed throughout Europe as the Celtic paradise, the happy island of the blessed. Ancient man came to believe that the souls of the dead were borne westwards towards the setting sun to an island of the western area, to the abode of the Glas and the Avalac, being ferried across the hazy sea by rowers whom a secret impulse impelled. The writer is referring here to the weird story of the Roman historian Procopius, who describes how the Breton fishermen found their boats sunk to the gunwale by invisible spirits of the dead whom they felt impelled to carry across Britain's shores, and where on arrival they saw their boats rise in the water as the souls landed, and they heard their names and status being checked by the voices of the other invisible beings. Fantastic as it seems, yet apparently the superstition was accepted by the Romans, who, it is said, for the reason absolved the Bretons from payment of the imperial tax. The Bretons, blood relations of the Western Highland Celts, like them, were and are psychic and prone to what is termed second sight. The Egyptians, whose fervent belief in an Amenta in the West, to which their dead proceeded by devious tunnels and queer boats, according to the Book of the Dead, were supposed to make their way to Amenta in the Hebrides, Staffa and Iona, being their Tuat, to be judged by Osiris. If found justified, they were again embarked and taken to the island of Blessed, where they dwelt in peace and happiness forever with Osiris. This island was none other than Avalon, hence the fame it enjoyed. The inquiring mind will desire to probe this mysterious belief and get to the why and wherefore of it possible. For we may be sure that there was a strong occult reason behind it. Pious beliefs and fervent faiths were not held by the ancients without some definite reason, such as that which caused Avalon to be regarded as the Celtic paradise. Avalon stretches back into the dim ages as a city with the most remarkable past, illustrious long before the period of the Great Catastrophe, ages before its connection with King Arthur, fabulous even though he be. It was the venerable heart of paradise, the region destroyed according to the book of Genesis because of the apple with which Eve tempted Adam to partake, which apple opened their eyes to pursuits the deity had forbidden them, and for which reason they expelled from the Garden of Eden, where cherubim and a flaming sword turned every way and prevented them from returning. Yet, and this is a point of importance which is essential should be understood, in spite of the apparent primordial aspect given to this event, the mythological version of the Great Catastrophe, it occurred comparatively late in the true chronology of the Old Testament, so deceptive for reasons I will later explain. As an event, it deserves to be placed in the same category as the war between the gods and the giants, or the destructions of the giants or the Rephaim, who were buried beneath the rocks and stones at Tartessus in the same war. They were all described hyperbolically in order to explain to those who could understand the inner meaning that is at a certain period. While a great war was raging, the participants in many cities destroyed by the hand of the deity, and that for long this territory was inhabitable. Investigations into the past of Avalon give it certain early scriptural names. It was Ajalon or Asia, where Abram dwelt in Mizraim and made his stronghold when he occupied the west country to procure its precious and necessary ores. It was also the name as Bethel, as I shall show. In addition, it bore other famous names in Egyptian annals, for it was originally Egyptian or Philistinish, named Memphis, so called by the Greeks, though it was probably Memphi or Mende or Menai. It is never known as Memphis in the Bible. In Numbers we are told that Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt, but Josephus, obviously uncertain to the identity of Zoan, in one passage proclaims it as Tanis and in another as Memphis. According to tradition, Osiris was buried at Memphis and others of the Ramses kings, for it was regarded as Egypt's sacred city. Isis was also said to have been buried there. Plutarch alludes to it as the haven of the good, where the tomb of the good man Osiris. We should not overlook the testimony of Manetho when he says that Salatis also lived at Memphis and made both the upper and lower regions pay tribute. He then adds that Salatis visited Abaris, as shown previously Hebron, annually for military and administrative reasons, implying therefore that Memphis was regarded by him as more important. For if Salatis and Abram were one and the same, as I have demonstrated, then we may discover that what the Greeks or Greek writers termed Memphis was really the same as Ai or Ajalon, both being situated in the heart of the metal region and both conveniently placed for the transport of ores. Perhaps I should explain this a little more fully. When Bronze Age came into being after the discovery that copper and tin enabled weapons of bronze to be made, which far transcended brass for spears or swords or other arms, the situation of Avalon on the island site, whence ores and other requirements could be transported easily by barge, canoe or raft, made it a natural centre of great importance to the patriarch or prince who had the wit to see that he was able to produce the goods and dominate all others. Moreover, as a defended island city, it offered exceptional attraction with the upstanding tor, which provided not only a powerful citadel, but towered over the surrounding flat and marshy country. To pursue the subject further, we have the tradition as narrated by Herodotus that Memphis owed its origin to a legendary king named Men or Menes. In those times, Egypt was a marsh, as also contended by the Ethiopians or Cushites, and that Menes raised a dike to protect large tracts of low-lying land against the incursions of the Nile, built Memphis and excavated a lake to its north and west. A successor to Menes, given the name of Moeris or Morris, excavated more of the lake and gave it his name. Moeris, which Herodotus described as having had a circumference of 455 miles, being replenished by a canal from the Nile. The land where this lake was built, he says, was excessively dry, for he's shown it in Egypt a peculiar state of things if, as he said earlier, it had been a swamp and was drained. One wonders how much of the information Herodotus gleaned from the Egyptians was authentic or merely hearsay, for he confesses elsewhere that the priests deceived him in regard to other subjects, and whether the priests of the later Egypt, like the Greeks, attributed to local sites their former history elsewhere. At all events, the details he obtained, albeit vague, so far as they go, bear an astonishing resemblance to the early history of Avalon. It was also an inland site situated on a lake. The Auxella and the marshland was banked up along the coast with a dike wall by some unknown authority in a prehistoric age. Of olden time, the river Brue flowed around the town, the only rising ground in this area, with its dominating tor, and enters the Bristol Channel south of the Mendips, and may indeed be compared with the supposed Mendes south of the Nile, although the later and the present Egypt has no relation to Memphis, whose ruins, or supposed ruins, are some 30 miles distant from even the beginning of the Mendes mouth. Until a century ago, Glastonbury was surrounded by the same swampy region, a large body of water with reeds named Mere Lake, a name uncommonly like Moris. The Auxella swamp area, as it is named by Ptolemy, had a circumference about equivalent to that cited by Herodotus. This area of Somerset, now drained, lies below sea level, but there was a time where the tide swept up the river estuaries, mingled with the four river streams, and resulted in a brackish inland sea, satisfactory maybe as the breeding grounds of eels and for the growth of sedge or reeds, whence the name Sedge Moor given to the large stretches of it. Where the land rose to higher levels stood isles in the early Christian times, owned by monastical fraternities. Not improbably on the site of the former pagan institution. In later times, says Mr. Webb, we read of the 7 islands of the 7 churches in the marshes of Somerset. In the north of the lagoon, skirted the Mendip Hills, embraced Glastonbury, Somerton, the legendary settlement of Hougadorn. Langport went southeast towards Hampdon Hill, then turned west along the Parrot Valley to the sea. Along the west, where there is no real coastline for over most of the area, the heavy Atlantic waves are held in a check solely by sand dunes and tough marram grass. The sea defences originated by an ancient and unknown race. However, first thus harnessed the ocean here must have undertaken the work before Glastonbury Pile villages came into existence. So important a feature of its antiquities, for otherwise these artificial sites could never have withstood the heavy tides and incursions of the sea, was it the work of the fabulous men of Menes. Apart from its defensive strength, Avalon yields evidence of having been an important centre of industry in a former age. The Reverend Mr. Marston claims that it was a capital, enjoyed a large manufacturing trade, and was a port for ages before it acquired its reputation for sanctity. Sir William Boyd Dawkins, in his work Early Man in Britain, thought its inhabitants were a busy, seafaring people in contact with the Gaul and the Mediterranean, and that the arts and crafts included weaving, spinning, pottery, smelting, and carpentry. It possessed, said he, a high technique in the manufacture of ironwork, bronze, and glass. The bronze Glastonbury bowl of a known date exhibits the highest degree of artistic skill and craftsmanship. The bronze Glastonbury bowl. Let's see what that is, guys. The Glastonbury bowl. Shit. This is a Glastonbury bowl. Bronze bowl about 2,000 years old. Of unknown date, exhibits the highest degree of artistic skill and craftsmanship. I suppose it does in a way. To me, it's not that impressive. Maybe for its day it was. Avalon's craft in smelting and metalwork takes us to the pile villages, where certain communities erected huts on piles with a protective palisade to conceal their activities from prying eyes. Godney Village, discovered in 1891, occupies a triangular space from 3 to 4 acres, and like that of Mere, 3 miles from Glastonbury, consists a number of low artificial mounds, formerly surrounded by a broad sheet of water known as Old Rhine. Within the palisade of Godney was a massive superstructure with the round huts of wattle erected on a foundation of heavy logs, brushwood, peat and clay resting on the piles. The huts were almost invariable, raised in clusters, intercommunicating with each other, were thatched, and all with a hearthstone in the centre, bearing signs of considerable usage. An oak door was found which seemed to have been one half of a double door. This settlement was reached by a causeway having a breakwater. What was the purpose of these segregated pile-built huts so diligently hidden away from the rest of the community? It has been suggested by some that they were constructed as a defence against savage beasts whose remains have been found in the Mendip caves, but such is begging the question. What was the purpose of these intercommunications, and why has every hut a hearthstone with evidence of considerable use but none of the domestic occupation? Were they for industrial purposes? If the dwellers had lived on a communal plan, one might have expected a few large hearthstones, but not necessarily one in the centre of every hut. What relics have been found are crucibles for smelting ores, and at a mere dome-shaped clay ovens for baking metalwork. Generally, the workmanship of the remains approximates to the late Bronze Age and the early Iron Ages, like those discovered on the hilltop village of Wiltshire. Do not the indications point to the fact that these were foundries instituted for manufacture of bronze and ironware, that the intercommunicating huts purpose that all were engaged in the like pursuit, that the double door indicates a busy workshop with people coming and going rather than a modest dwelling? Why were these workers hidden away out of touch with the world on artificial islands, unless it was where that they were engaged in tasks not intended for the eyes of the rabble? In other words, it is not also a reasonable implication that they were those mysterious Kebari workers or cyclops who laboured traditionally in the manufacture of magic works under the lame blacksmith deity Hephaestus, called Ptah in Memphis, his great city, whose helpers were the fabricators of thunder, according to Hesiod, and who wielded superior power, as Homer says, implying their secret trade in islands and inaccessible places. The piled dwellings of Avalon need not deceive any student of ancient magic, for they yield every sign of having been designed for that specific purpose. How secretively and effectually did the ancients preserve the secrets of what they termed magic, and how few even yet have penetrated behind the symbolism of it all. The very myth of the tree of knowledge in this Garden of Eden relates to this magic, where the serpent, lighting or celestial flames, tempted Eve, Mother Earth, to eat of the apple, the concomitants of a prehistoric bomb or grenade, of which the ingredients were obtained in her womb, and that Adam, antediluvian man, was tempted to eat of the apple, that is, utilise the knowledge, and as a result they were expelled from this same Garden of Eden where Avalon stands. So I think the author, he's kind of hinted all the way through this book that gunpowder, it must have been gunpowder he's hinting. He's never said gunpowder, but he keeps saying that this black magic has something to do with explosives. ancient explosives. So I think he's trying to connect the apple from the Garden of Eden to some kind of hand grenade. But anyway, we'll continue. I'll always be open-minded and give the author a chance to explain himself. Does not magic... Does not magic perhaps explain the ancient name of Avalon, the Isle of Apples, a name derived, it is said, from the Welsh afal, an apple, hence Avalon in the Cymric tongue, Avalon in the British. Apple, or a bomb resembling an apple. In fact, may it not stress Avalon's secret activity in the realms of that very science, for which reasons the ancients believed the Almighty destroyed these lands for a long while. For there are suggestions of Avalon's activities in the realms of magic, as for example King Arthur's famous magical sword, Caliban, traditionally forged in that city, and in the bardic stories of how, when he was wounded at Camlan and carried to Avalon, he confided his sword to one of his knights with injunctions to cast it into the lake. He did so, and immediately an immense arm arose from the water, seized it, waved it 3 times in the air, and disappeared. At all events, we are confronted with these mysterious hut clusters erected on artificial islets containing evidence of a former activity in the shape of crucibles, bronze wire, dross, slag and other like refuse, with every indication of extreme secrecy and mystification. I will leave these traces of Avalon provisionally to turn to scriptural records, bearing, it is suggested, on the same ancient city from Avalon, Avalac or Avala to those of Havilah, Ajalon or Ajalon. First of all, study this name Havilah or Avila, the original name accorded to the Garden of Eden. Genesis says, "And a river ran out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became 4 heads. The name of the first is Pishon, that is it which compasseth the whole land of Avila, where there is gold. There is bdellium and the oxen stone. We cannot but observe that the river with 4 heads or mouths, which compassed Havilah, very closely resembles that of Avenius, with the 4 rivers of which the river Tartessus was outstanding, the latter corresponding to the text with Pishon. In effect, it appears to initiate that the Garden of Eden was watered by 4 rivers in the land of Havilah, where gold was found." Leaving aside this aspect for the moment, let us examine the name Havilah. Here is given the son of Cush as brother to Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Surely the interpretation of geographical genealogy in the West is that Havilah, like the others, was a region founded by the Cushites or Chaldeans or Gadites, and was the brother of other important sites similarly founded. Sheba will be shown to have indicated Beersheba, near the city of Wells, Dedan, the city of Dan, now Taunton, or near that ancient city. Ramah was another rendering of Ramah or Hebron, and finally Havilah becomes none other than Avila or Avalon. See how this develops. In this area of Havilah, Abraham early pitched his tent to a mountain east of Bethel, having Bethel on the west and Hai or Ijah on its east, which he reached marching southwards from Mizraim, and from this mountain site he advanced yet farther south to Gerar. But his headquarters remained from where his tent had been in the beginning, between Bethel and Hai. For a while he sojourned in Gerar, a Philistine city lying between Kadesh and Shur. In my interpretation, Shur or Asher was the country where is now Dorset, and Kadesh and Bristol or Portishead, and Gerar answers to Somerton, where we are told in the triads repaired Hu-Gadon, just about halfway between the two, lying 7 miles south of Avalon. Another resort of Abraham was Beersheba, or 7 wells, often abbreviated into Sheba, 7 wells understood, or its plural, Shebirim. Here it was that, in order to allay the jealousy of Sarah, the patriarch dismissed his Egyptian concubine Hagar and her infant son Ishmael. In the neighbourhood of Beersheba was Cheddar or Gedor, where the Seminites in these parts along the west coast found fat pastures for their flocks. Nearby also was the gorge of Michmash, where Philistines and Israelites fought bitterly more than once. We need seek no farther afield for the city of seven walls than to the ancient episcopal city itself, yet named Wells, which lies only 6 miles from Glastonbury and possesses its 7 wells to this day. Nor should be difficulty in identifying Cheddar as Cheddar, to this day a fat pastoral district, owing its volcanic soil, or the gorge of Michmash with its sharp rocks, as Cheddar Gorge. This region was originally peopled by the Philistines, and thus it was the scene of many of the savage fights between the two people over many centuries. So where is this? Have a look at this. Cheddar Gorge. Cheddar Gorge. Have a look at Cheddar Gorge. Look at that. It looks... Cheddar Gorge is a limestone gorge in the Mendip Hills near the village of Cheddar, Somerset, England. This gorge is the site of the Cheddar Show Caves, where Britain's oldest complete human skeleton, Cheddar Man, estimated to be over 9,000 years old, was found in 1903. Older remains of the upper late Paleolithic era, 12,000 13,000 years ago, have been found. The caves, produced by the activity of an underground river, contain stalactites and stalagmites. The gorge is part of the site of special scientific interest called Cheddar Complex. Cheddar Gorge includes the caves and the other attractions, has become a tourist destination. In 2005, a poll of Radio Times readers following its appearance in the 2005 television programme The Seven Natural Wonders, Cheddar Gorge was named as the second greatest natural wonder in Britain, surpassed only by Dan Yer Ogov Caves. The gorge attracts about 500 visitors per year. It's Dan Yer Ogov. That could be something to do with that tribe of Dan he talks about. Dan Yer Ogov, Welsh pronunciation Dan Yer Ogov, located at the National Show Caves Centre for Wales, is a 17-kilometre long cave system in South Wales, about 5 miles north of Ystraglenni and 15 miles southwest of Brecon in the Brecon National Park. It is the main feature of a show cave complex, which is claimed to be the largest in Europe and is one of the major tourist attractions in Wales. The first section of the cave system is open to the public, but the extensive cave system beyond is scheduled as a national nature reserve and is open only to bona fide cavers. The bones of some 42 humans, as well as numerous animal bones, have been found in one of the nearby chambers of the cave system. Wow, pretty cool. You learn something new every day, guys. Although it may seem a digression, I will follow for a short while with the adventures of Hagar, who, after being driven away from Beersheba, carried her baby son to the wilderness of Beersheba, which would describe the rugged, rocky, barren Mendip country, immediately rising towards 900 feet beyond Wells. If she were forced to carry her infant into the sterile and rocky region in that long distant day when the climate of Britain was subtropical, little wonder that the gourd of water was soon consumed and the child dying of thirst, when, so the story goes, as she sat despairing on a rock, turning her back to the infant to be spared seeing his death agonies, the angel appeared and opened her eyes to a well in the vicinity. Such a well might be the famous Wookey Hole, in whose deep caverns rises in the Somerset Axe, but more likely perhaps the event relates to Eber Rocks about a mile beyond, which may be acquired by the name from Abram the Hebrew. If we were to follow the wanderings of the Ishmaelites, or the Hagarites, as they were also called, after Hagar, their matriarch, in any detail it would compel a long digression, but we are told that they went to the land of Edom, Cornwall and Devon, and then dwelt for some centuries between Havilah or Avalon and Shur or Asher, Dorset. until in the days of Saul they were disposed by the sons of Reuben in the land of Gilead. And in the days of Saul, the Reubenites made war with the Hagarites who fell by their hands. Thus they became nomads and were classified as Egyptians. I wonder where I was going to say that. The first gypsies or wanderers. The Hagarite settlement from whence the sons of Reuben expelled them may answer to the region between Heytesbury and Warminster, where lie the great prehistoric camps of Scratchbury and Knook Castle in the Chalk Country. The old name of Heytesbury was Hegeridsbury, the byre or dwelling place of the Hegerids, or we may allege Hagarites. In Edom, they possibly worked with tin on Dartmoor. Reverting to the regions of Havilah, compassed by the river Pishon, with 4 heads, in the book of Judges, a record much more ancient in origins than Genesis, a later compilation, a post-captivity summary of the Israelite history, which was written in Babylon. The same river Pishon is named Kishon, immortalized by Deborah, the Israelite prophetess, as the ancient river on the occasion when it suddenly swelled, flooded the land, and swept away the invading host of Sisera. The river Kishon was related to a swampy locality called Merom or Meroz, probably the same as Meribah or Eriba, whose neighbours Deborah fiercely upbraided in these words: "Curse ye, Meroz, said the angel of the Lord, curse ye bitterly, the inhabitants thereof, because they came not to help of the Lord against the mighty." In other words, after praising those who fought and defeated Sisera, captain of the host of Jabin, a king of Canaan who ruled in Hazor, she admonished the 3 adjoining tribes who gave no help. These were Dan, Asher, and Reuben. "Why did Dan remain in ships?" demanded Deborah bitterly, or as Asher continued on the seashore, or as Reuben remained in his sheepfolds. In this battle, Sisera had 900 chariots of iron, and Barak of Kadesh Naphtali gathered 10,000 men from Kadesh and from Mount Tabor, which appears to have been the Tor of Glastonbury, and utterly defeated Sisera with the aid of the river Kishon. Can we more or less assess the locations of these tribes? Asher, on the seashore, adjoined Great Zidon or Sidon. This famous port and ancient manufacturing city of all kinds of metals lay in the heart of the southern ore region, with gold, tin, copper and iron all within easy reach. It was destroyed largely by earthquake, as Strabo records, but no trace of it remains in Palestine. It must be placed at the mouth of the river Axe, where lies Seaton, once a port of account, but nowhere on the south coast has the sea committed worse ravages than from Seaton or Sidmouth, which was swallowed up miles of former shorelands. The river Sid is silted up, but it was also a port. The harbour destroyed by falls of rock, and the old town was long ago buried beneath the shingle. Among its antiquities was the head of a standard washed up by the sea, represented the centaur Chiron, carrying baby Achilles. At Axmouth, the remains of very old vessels and anchors have been recovered from under the soil. Phelps says that ironware was recovered to have been once manufactured in the locality. The former great importance of Seaton, a probable corruption of Sidon or Sidmouth again, suggests the name, is amply proved by the fact that the great Fosse Way, stretching down from the Humber, entering Somerset at the 3 Shire Stones, made its way to the mouth of the Axe, where the Romans gave it, or Axmouth, the name of Isca, or Isca Damanorum. Another proof of the former great importance of this area is that it was a prehistoric time, in so far as Britain's recognised history is concerned, one of the most strongly fortified in the country. Interesting. The name of Isca. These entrenchments, says Phelps, form part of what has been termed a chain of forts extending from the sea a considerable distance inland on the borders of Devon, Dorset and Somerset. These fortifications stretched downwards Hampden Hill in one direction and north-westwards towards the source of the little stream Yarty near Nirosh Castle near Taunton. The River Axe separates Dorset from East Devon, and on its left bank was Asher or Shur, the original Syria, the tribe which was not included for good reasons among the tribes of Israel in David's reign, and who dwelt between Tyre, Portland and Sidon. They stretched northwards to Camel Hill near Cadbury, probably the latter great prehistoric camp being in Kadesh and Naphtali of Barak. They included in their domain Eshcol, the later Roman Aeschylus, the present Ilchester on the Foss Way. Their northern neighbour was Reuben, which tribe, after throwing out the Hagarites, stretched to Warminster and Heytesbury as previously described. Westward of these was the tribe of Dan, or part of it. We have the account of how men of this tribe of Dan, at some early time seeking new territory, and with the help of Micah's Levite, made a murderous descent on Laish, apparently reaching their objective by means of boats or canoes. They massacred the inhabitants and settled there, calling it the city of Dan, because Laish had no deliverer, for it was far from Sidon. The strange reference to Sidon infers that Laish was under its protection, but too far distant from the Sidonians to be able to come to the rescue of the inhabitants against the piratical adventure. If, as I have claimed, the former Sidon stood where we now find Seaton, Sidmouth or Axminster, about 40 miles distant, the otherwise invidious Bible reference is incomprehensible. Is comprehensible. Taunton or Tantown, capital of Somerset, stands just south of the Quantock Hills, where formerly copper and silver lead were mined, and within the easy distance of the ore regions of Devon and Cornwall. The original city of Dan may have been at Norton Fitzwarren, less than 2 miles up from the present city, and where are the remains of an ancient camp of size. So where was it? Norton Fitzwarren. Norton Fitzwarren. Let's have a look at that. So the history of this place: the village on the southern slope of Norton Camp, a large hill fort that shows evidence of occupation from Neolithic times through the Bronze Age to the Roman occupation of Britain. The Church of All Saints dates from the late 13th and 14th century. It has been designated as a Grade 2 listing building. The parish of Norton Fitzwarren was part of the Taunton Deane Hundred. So you can see here again, once again, the author is talking about places that were occupied. Now, this book was written in 1948, or published in 1948, sorry. So, all these places, he's named all these old hill forts, they exist, and they do date back to the Bronze Age. It's not like he's mentioning places and they don't exist, but we'll have a look at the Norton Camp. Norton Camp is a Bronze Age hill fort at Norton Fitzwarren near Taunton in Somerset, England. The earthwork consists of a singular circular rampart up to 3 metres high, with 3 holloway entrances dominated by linear banks extending out from the main perimeter. The ring has a diameter of about 250 metres, enclosing an area of 5 hectares. The fort is at the top of a low hill, 50 metres, about 1 kilometre north of the River Tone. The site was excavated in 1908. The original ditch was shown to be 2.75 metres deep. Pottery shards dated from the Bronze Age and the Roman period, but no evidence of occupation from other periods. Further excavations in 1968 and 71 by Nancy and Philip Langmaid found its flints from the Mesolithic and Neolithic, as well as extensive hoards of bronze metalwork, 9 bracelets, an axe head, and sword moulds from the Bronze Age, 700 BC. They also found evidence of refortification in the Iron Age from the period of the Roman occupation. Nice. The ancient monument is also included on the Heritage at Risk register due to its vulnerability to arable ploughing. Interesting stuff. Right. where was I? I'll just start here. Taunton, or Tan Town, capital of Somerset, stands just south of the Quantock Hills, where formerly copper and silver lead were mined. The original city of Dan may have been at Norton Fitzwarren, less than 2 miles from the present city, where there are remains of an ancient camp of size, with the maritime city on the borders of Exela and the wide estuary of the Parrett, which flooded the surrounding country in 1607, like in Sisera's time, and agrees in all respects with the Kishon of Deborah and the Pishon of Havilah. We may understand the anger of the prophetess, and the other tribes who took part in the war, when they were deserted by the 3 tribes who should have been mostly concerned in defeating the tyrant Canaanite king. It is only by a true grasp of topography that such history can properly be assimilated, otherwise it becomes obscure and meaningless, like so much of the Old Testament. The situation of the city of Dan is supported by Ezekiel's reference to the trade of Tyre. The men of Dedan were thy merchants, many of the isles were the merchandise of thy hand. Dan also and Javan, going to and fro, occupied in thy fairs. Bright Iron, Cassia, and Calamus were in thy market. Many isles lay scattered about in Exela near Taunton, and in others off North Devon and Cornwall, of which lay Lundy survives, although many others have probably been swallowed by the insatiable waves. Of the other products named by Ezekiel, if iron were intended, this ore was mined from early days in the Brendan Hills, not far from Taunton. Copper came from the adjoining Quantocks, tin was procurable from Cornwall and Devon, and Calamus or reeds were prodigal in the swampy Exela, and in great demand for thatching, flooring, and for the manufacture of papyrus. Thus, Ezekiel states, from Dan in the south of this important region to the Avon in its north, such commodities were valuable cargo. Another indication of the situation of Dedan or Dan is given by Jeremiah, whose words imply that it lay in the close proximity to Edom or Cornwall. Concerning Edom, is wisdom no more in Temar? Flee ye, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I will bring calamity upon him. The governing word is him, which must be taken as a signifying Edom to suffer from some celestial calamity. Dedan, in proximity to it, is therefore told in prophetical words to beware, to flee, to turn back from the sea, to seek refuge. The tribe of Dan, some of whom went north to the Hebrides, the Danai of the Greeks and the De Danan of the Erse traditions are well known to British folklore as the Heraclids, whom many later princes of Scotland claimed as their ancestors. The isles mentioned by Ezekiel require further mention. Strabo says the 10 islands were 10 in number, inhabited by men clad in dark garments reaching to the foot and bound round the waist by a cord or girdle. They carried a staff in the hand and resembled the Furies in a tragedy, meaning they looked unkempt and lived chiefly by their flocks, but that they had minds of tin and lead. They described a monastic order of fraternity, many of whom existed in the Celtic faith long before Theodosius imposed in Christianity on the West. Strabo says the isles were called the Cassiterides, and they may be accepted as the Isles of the Cassi or the Isles of Chittim. The foregoing therefore explains the general position in the west of many outstanding cities and sites in the early days of the Bible lands. Now I return to the topography relating to Havilah and of that famous city of Avalon itself. Ajalon, with the hill of Bethel, was properly one community, of which I represented the fortress on the height, otherwise the Tor. Bethel to the west stood on a not very high hill, where was the house of God, first sanctified by Jacob. For here it was he slept with his head resting on a stone, and dreamt of paradise, whereby he declared, Surely the Lord is in this place. This is the gate of heaven. Thus it became recognized as a most sacred spot, and was named Paradise, signifying near unto God, near God. And here Jacob erected an altar. He slept at Bethel, coming from Beersheba. And this is where Scotland comes in, guys. Scotland's one of Scotland's most prized possessions is the Stone of Scone, or the Stone of Destiny. It's been fought over by the Irish. I think it was Irish, Scotland and England have all been fighting over it, and all the British monarchies have been anointed on top of this stone. The stone goes under the throne. So this apparently this stone was the same stone that Jacob fell asleep on, a stone pillow, and it's kept in Edinburgh Castle apparently. I've seen it, but they say it's a fake, so I don't know if I've seen the actual real stone. Originating from Avalon, as seems to have been the case, the history of Jacob's stone throws a more direct light upon its past rather than it had been brought all the way from the Near East, as generally supposed. As all know, it now reposes in Westminster Abbey, on which is superimposed on the coronation chair, used for the ceremony of the crowning of all the monarchs of England since Edward I captured it from the King of the Picts, and who carried it triumphantly to London. All except Queen Mary Tudor, who refused to be crowned on it. This ancient stone, taken traditionally from Bethel to Hebron, thence to Jerusalem, on the fall of the city according to Jeremiah, was carried away by him firstly to Mizpah, and finally concealed in the Pharaoh's palace at Taphnes, the Daphne of Herodotus. In all likelihood, the present Llandaff near Cardiff, a very ancient and religious centre, from Taphnes as the Irish traditions. Jeremiah removed the stone and took it, together with other sacred relics, to Tara, and later it was removed to Dunstaffridge Castle, Oban, and subsequently to Scone, upon which the Scottish kings had been crowned, until Edward removed it to London, affording thus a very complete itinerary of its history, and one also very different from the accepted account of a journey from the Near East, which has caused many to be sceptical of the claims made for its past. The Irish have definite records of Jeremiah dwelling in their island, of his burial place, and of the two princesses, one named Scotta, who played a large part in the genealogy of the Milesian king of Ireland, and who is described as a daughter of a pharaoh, as she was, for he adopted them both. To Bethel and Ai did the aged prophet Samuel send Saul, after he had privily anointed him captain of the host of Israel, and told him to go forward until thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor, and thou shalt meet the 3 men going up to God in Bethel. After that thou shalt come to the hill of God, where is a garrison of the Philistines. It shall come to pass, when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place, and thou shalt prophesy with them. Thus the surprised citizens, seeing the tough giant of a warrior intermingled with the prophets, descending from the high place, asked incredulously, Is Saul also among the prophets? The interpretation of the passage is as follows. Saul, coming from the direction of the north, reaches the plain of Tabor, where it is Avalon, meets 3 men on their way to the house of the god in Bethel, otherwise Wormhill, Glastonbury, near where stand the ruins of the ancient abbey. He proceeds onwards to reach his hill of God, Mount Tabor, where is stationed a Philistine garrison, and is accordingly the citadel or fortress. Still onward, he passes the city of Ai or Ajalon, and then encounters the seminary or schools of prophets coming down from the high place of Bethel. That is the temple or altar of the deity, or Worrell Hill, the hill of God, held by the Philistines in the present Tor. Observe that Samuel spoke of the plain of Tabor in conjunction with Bethel, for the only Tabor we know of in the Old Testament is Mount Tabor, which mountain is represented as standing stark in a flat plain, exactly as Glastonbury Tor rises abruptly like a huge sugar loaf and dominates the flat country of Somerset. Glastonbury Tor. An outstanding landmark for miles around. Mount Tabor, the same mountain where Abraham dwelt and where he parted company with Lot, is and can be none other than Glastonbury Tor. The Tor has indeed been compared by writers with the Mount Tabor by those who saw a resemblance, but little conceived that they could be one and the same. It became subsequently regarded with extreme veneration as a traditional scene of Christ's transfiguration. The Reverend Mr. Lawson thus describes it: "The supposed scene of our blessed Saviour's transfiguration and the alleged holy mount of St. Peter, Mount Tabor, was doubtlessly the hill of globular form on which Polybius placed the town of Atiberium. It was at one time so well fortified that Antiochus took it only by a stratagem similar to that which Joshua employed when he captured Ai." The reverend writer was seemingly unaware that Ai or Ajalon was identical with Mount Tabor, although the quotation from Genesis and that from Samuel should have told him so. Joshua's stratagem, to which he alludes in order to capture the strongly fortified height, regarded then as invulnerable, was to send an indifferent force to make a feint frontal attack upon it, whereupon the garrison opened their gates and chased the foe as far as Shebarim, the city of wells. Next day Joshua again sent a small attacking force, who once more drew away the defenders, but on this occasion he had concealed a strong army by Bethel, on the further side of the mountain, who, once the gates were opened and the garrisons were pursuing his small force, entered it and put the people to the sword. It was an ancient elementary trick of strategy. Mount Tabor, Ai, and Bethel were all one in the same city. Doubtlessly Mount Tabor, Abraham's mountain, was fortified from an early date. When Abraham first occupied the site in the time of Samuel, the citadel was held by the Philistines, as it was more than once, although evidently peaceably. Israelites were permitted to go to the town when there was no war between the two people. Even in Samuel's day, Mount Tabor was known as the hill of God, although the sacred place sanctified by Jacob's dream was in the hill of Bethel. We hear little of Tabor from the time of David onwards, perhaps understandable in circumstances. There is a considerable hiatus, yet Mount Tabor shone with great glory as the traditional scene of the transfiguration of Christ, bearing on which is the extraordinary legend that the Holy Grail of the Lord's Last Supper was taken to Glastonbury by St. Joseph of Arimathea, which sacred vessel he was said to have buried at the foot of Tor, and from the place of its sepulchre there gushed forth the blood spring, which may be inspected to this day. If the tradition be true, and it is not my function to question it, why should St. Joseph of Arimathea have crossed the seas and made his way to Avalon, where he built his church, and expressively have selected the Tor for the concealing place for so precious a relic, unless the chalice was associated with the most sacred moments of the life of the Saviour, and because it was peculiarly related to the Tor? As the Mount of Transfiguration, there was every ostensible reason for such a pious act on the part of St. Joseph. And this is another thing, guys, that if you're fans of the Da Vinci Code and anything like that, you find that when you start digging into the symbolism, things start bringing you back to Scotland. And in the Da Vinci Code, I think it wasn't a chalice they were looking for, like a relic. It was more that the bloodline was in Britain, in Scotland, at Roswell Chapel. That's how the film ended. That's how the book ended. That the bloodline of Jesus was actually in Britain. That was the Holy Grail. The fact they had kids, and that ancestors of Jesus might still be alive today. That was the whole sort of conclusion of the Dan Brown books. Well, that was what I got from it. That the secret was that the bloodline was actually in Britain. Anyway, nevertheless, in Glastonbury, the most sacred Christian site, as it was evidently in the time of Samuel, is Wirral Hill, or Weary Al Hill, less than a mile west of the Tor, for here did St. Joseph land weary and tired. and when he had climbed the hill leant on his staff, which took root and produced a thorn tree, and was said to have miraculously blossomed annually on the day of Nativity. That is a pious tradition, of course, but undoubtedly the saint did settle in Avalon, built his church, was buried there, and the thorn tree flourished until some 3 centuries ago. His church, built of wattle, with the famous abbey and monastery, were all destroyed in a disastrous fire in 1184. The restoration of the abbey was ordered by Henry II, who visited the site, and who partly restored it, as did Edward I. But this splendid edifice was never fully completed. A terrible earthquake caused great destruction in 1276, but for all that it was worthy of its origin, the most important abbey in the British Isles, only to be finally ruined by Henry VIII, its revenues sequestered, and the beautiful edifices on which so much loving labour had been lavished, with its roof stripped and its treasures stolen, together with its monastery, remains a ruined reminder of the destructiveness of man on the site where nearly 4,000 years before Jacob had erected his house of God. Following the coming of St. Joseph and the building of the Wattle Church, Avalon became the Sancta Sanctorum of the Christian faith in England, and here were deposited the saint's bones in the churchyard on the south of St. Mary Chapel. His tomb was said to have been borne the simple epitaph, Ad Britanos veni post Christum sepelevi, docor quievi. I came to the Britons after I buried Christ, I taught I rest. Other early saints were buried there, including St. Benignus, St. Dunstan, St. Gildas, and the Venerable Bede, and many others. William of Malmesbury says that St. Gildas died there and was buried in the old church before the altar. Also, he says that St. Patrick was sent to Ireland by Pope Celestine and returned to Cornwall, thence to Glastonbury, where he became an abbot. Whether these leaders of the early church, which rose to so great eminence at Avalon, possessed knowledge of its link with Mount Tabor and back to Abraham and Jacob, who can say? But its importance is fully demonstrated by the names of the famous churchmen who were its devoted sons. St. Patrick is said to have become its first abbot in 449, succeeded by St. Benignus, who was born at Meath, became Bishop of Armagh, and followed St. Patrick to Glastonbury. Many Irish saints also visited and worked there, including St. Columba. It was claimed that the worship of Christ was first instituted at Avalon, and St. Augustine actually reported the fact to Pope Gregory in the year 600. As Augustine was specially sent from Rome to convert the Britons, and yet wrote in such vein, there is strong testimony to its truth. In 704, the pious king Ein of the West Saxons granted a special charter to the church and monastery, in which he said, he acts thus in his desire to strengthen the first church in Britain, and the foundation and the origin of all religion. And, indeed, he felt so strongly on the subject that he visited Rome, and there he besought the Pope to take Glastonbury under his special protection because of its sanctity. The question of the claims of this ancient city to have been the fons et origo of the Christian religion has of itself no part or parcel in my general investigations here, except in so far as that St. Joseph of Arimathea may justly be regarded as having been specifically drawn in to it for some definite motive when he selected it as a site for his church. We are all aware that the early Christian teachers regarded it as a pious duty to erect churches on the site of some former pagan fane, like St. Columba's settlement in Iona, the idea being to expel the devil from such lairs, and the same belief may have been inspired by St. Joseph. Moreover, there still remains the strange question of Mount Tabor and the transfiguration of Christ as witnessed by many according to Christian doctrine. If Mount Tabor were the scene of that sacred phenomenon, and if St. Joseph actually concealed the holy chalice in the Tor, still called Chalice Hill, or even, if such were believed to have been the case at the dawn of Christianity, we find a most significant link between Avalon and the biblical Ai or Ajalon, which I have traced down to the Havilah throughout the earliest times of Abraham himself. It would rather seem as though the island capital lay fallow or in ruins over a period, perhaps even for a long period, from its palmy days before it became so famed as Christian site. We find no mention of it in Roman records, such as Ptolemy's Geographia, the Anton Iter Ravanus, or the Notitia. It may have remained for a long while derelict or drowned, except its Tor and Wirral Hill. Like the Pile villages, it may have largely lain under an accretion of soil. The Reverend Mr. Marston, who I have previously cited, asserts that Exela was the key to Western Britain, and the meeting place of many civilizations, as no doubt true. He claims the Cymry built the great camps and roads uniting the chief centres, and states that the Glastonbury's chief exports were corn, cattle, fabrics, gold, silver, lead and lapis calamaris, or carbonate of zinc. 2 seconds. Right guys, I'll do a couple of more pages. I'll call it a day. Been pretty interesting though. He also claims that Hugh Gaddern led the Cymry into Somerset at least 1,000 years BC. If we identify him with the Abram or Salatis, as is unavoidable, the date of his coming would have been nearer 2160 BC than 1000 BC. Hugh Garnon is supposed to have first settled at Somerton and to have given the name to the country, which lies only 7 miles of Glastonbury and bears traces of great antiquity, which remains of a Roman road to Ilchester. It lay on the boundary of the marsh Axela, and nearby is a small hamlet named Paradise. This name is found again near Burnham, and more notably at Glastonbury on the vicinity of Wirral Hill. Local folklore declares that Jesus, when a boy, was taken to Avalon by his uncle Joseph, and that they lodged in Paradise. How comes that this name Paradise is to be found in 3 places in Somerset, but nowhere else? In this world of boasted progress in culture and civilization, which those words portend, it may formulate a solemn thought in the minds of some when we survey the romantic history of this most ancient city at a period of some 4,000 years ago, that a pious patriarch set up an altar on whose site a lowly but ineffably precious fane was subsequently erected because he associated his vision of the angels and the ladder to heaven as a sign that he was near to God, which is the meaning of paradise. That through the ages the same city became sacred in the eyes of men for the reasons yet to be shown, but indelibly associated with King Arthur. That in due course it became the first seat of Christianity, where a splendid fane was reared through the goodwill and piety of the worshippers of Christ, inspired in the first place by the examples of St. Joseph of Arimathea, and yet that all should have been brought to utter ruin through the avarice, malice and hypocrisy of Henry VIII, who never failed to prate of his Christianity, and that finally in a materialistic world where the tyranny of a Tudor king wreaked great wrong to Christian ethics. Nevertheless, Glastonbury Abbey and the vestiges of its monastery stand yet a ruin on the site of the venerable past as a lasting memory of something infinitely greater than worldly aims. In the foregoing, I have endeavoured to produce factors to explain that Ai or Aijalon and Bethel became the Avalon of Somerset, and as Avalon of the Havilah of Genesis, the Garden of Eden paradise, so that in turn became, according to the scriptures, the scene from whence Adam and Eve were expelled, that it was the true land of Sodom, that it was for a while a region of flame and fire, The Lord God sent man forth from the Garden of Eden, and he placed at the east of the garden cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. But nothing really dies. The Garden of Eden, Havilah, Paradise, all was restored, and the heart of the pagan underworld, or Anwen, was destined to give birth to the first church of Christ. Only then did the internal deities pass into the limbo of the forgotten past. Right, I'll give it a rest there today, guys. But interesting stuff again. Page 136. I'm probably more than halfway through it, so I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me.